What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing a complete hero guide for probably one of the better characters in Star Wars Battlefront 2, that being Han Solo. In these hero guides we're going to be covering everything that could possibly need covering, from base stats, ability stats, the best star cards for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, as well as some of the best maps to choose them on, some general tips for those game modes, the best star cards for Heroes vs Villains and HvV Showdown, which enemy characters you need to look out for, and then lastly covering some general tips for the hero game modes as well. So as you can see, this guide is going to be breaking down every single aspect of the hero. If you're new around here and you end up enjoying this video, then be sure to subscribe to the channel for more Battlefront 2 content, and be sure to hit that notification bell as well so that you are notified each time I upload more videos like this going forward. But anyway, with that out of the way, guys, let's get stuck right into it. So starting off with Han's base stats, and his stats are definitely fairly well rounded, not the best by any means, but definitely not the worst either. Starting off with his base HP, he has 650, which is pretty much the average for blaster users, and as for how much health he can regenerate at once, his regen is 200, which again is pretty much the average for most blaster heroes in the game. In terms of his iconic DL44's damage, each shot deals 55 damage to the body at long range and 80 damage at close range, and as for headshots, it deals 104 damage to the head at range and a whopping 152 damage to the head up close, which is enough to actually one-hit kill most regular troops in the game. So as you can see, his blaster is very deadly at pretty much any range. His rate of fire works out to be 108 shots per minute, which is definitely on the slower side, although it's actually not even close to the slowest in the game, and that's just to sort of slightly counter its damage, as obviously the damage stats are insane. He can only fire 8 shots before the weapon will need to cool down, which I believe is the worst of any blaster heroes. However, its cooldown is actually pretty fast, so that's not quite as bad as it seems. And as for the spread, it actually has absolutely no spread at all. There is a little bit of recoil, but the actual blaster bolts will just go exactly where the dot crosshair is. There's no bloom involved like there is with, say, Iden or Lando, for example, so if you can hit your shots, you're going to be very deadly indeed. Now, moving on to his abilities, and his ability set is kind of a mixed bag, honestly. It's definitely improved on what it was when the game launched, but in saying that, it is far from the best ability set in the game. His left ability, and definitely his best ability, is the Detonite charge, and this one just causes Han to throw a sticky charge, which can then be detonated whenever you want by hitting the same button again. It deals anywhere from 70 to 200 damage depending on how far away the enemy is from the explosion, and if they're close enough to the charge when it goes off, they will actually be knocked down as well, provided that they weren't obliterated by the explosion itself. It has an 18-second cooldown, which honestly, for how powerful and versatile this ability is, that's actually a pretty solid cooldown time. If it were north of 20 seconds, I would still say that's pretty balanced, so 18 seconds is not too bad at all. Moving on, we have his middle ability, which is called Sharpshooter, and this one causes Han's DL44 to fire rapidly for the next few seconds. It lasts for anywhere from 3 to 25 seconds depending on how much you shoot. If you shoot non-stop, it obviously runs out in 3 seconds, or if you were to activate it and kind of just let it run out, it will last for up to 25 seconds. This was pretty hard to test, as I actually had to go and sort of edit the footage and test it with a frame-by-frame comparison, but it seems to give the DL44 a 66% increase in fire rate, so just slightly less than twice as fast as its normal fire rate, and it has a very nice 15-second cooldown, so yet another ability that can be used very regularly. Now for his right ability, we have Shoulder Charge, and this one causes Han to sprint forward, knocking over and damaging the first enemy that he hits. It is quite rare, but you can also hit multiple people if you do hit them at exactly the same time. It's only really ever happened to me a few times, honestly, but it can be done if you do time it absolutely perfectly. It deals 200 damage to troopers, meaning it is a one-hit kill on all non-buffed troopers, including heavies, and then it deals 150 damage against enemy heroes, just to make it a little bit more balanced, dealing damage even through enemy blocks, and obviously knocking enemies down unless they are blocking, at which point it will just stagger them. It has a 10-second cooldown, which once again is super fast, so all three of his abilities have some really solid cooldown times, and that does make them all slightly better in the long run, as you can constantly use his abilities throughout each game. So that is it for all of his base stats and abilities, and now we're going to move on to some more tips for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, starting off with his best star cards. Keep in mind, these cards are just a matter of opinion. There aren't really any loadouts in the game that are objectively the best or anything like that, but these are just what I find to work best in these modes. The first card I'd recommend is his Airburst card, and this one makes it so that detonating his Detonite charge before it attaches to a surface will increase its damage by up to 20%. The thing with the Detonite charge is that more often than not you will be blowing it up before it hits the ground anyway, so adding a 20% increase to its damage is almost a no-brainer, taking its damage to up to 240 against regular troopers, and also just increasing its damage at range as well. well. The second card I'd recommend is the Broad Shoulders card, and this one makes it so that Han receives less damage when using Shoulder Charge by up to 40%. Shoulder Charge is a really solid ability, however it does obviously leave you pretty open to attack, and so this just gives you a little bit more safety when you use it, and it can also help it if you use it to sort of quickly run away from the action as well. The third card I'd recommend is the All-In card, and this one makes it so that each kill you get with Shoulder Charge will actually reduce the cooldown time for the next use by up to 50%, taking those 10-second cooldowns down to only 5 seconds, which is pretty insane. It's pretty rare that you'll ever use this ability and not get a kill with it, and if you're on a map like the Death Star or Starkiller Base for example, there are usually multiple enemies nearby if you do find one enemy, so this can really turn this ability into a game changer in those close quarters areas, and especially combined with the last card that adds to his survivability, they are a really solid combination. Honestly, Han's cards are not the best overall. He's probably the character who benefits the least from his card selection, as none of them are amazing and he's pretty solid without any cards to be honest, but these are just the 3 that I tend to run in these modes anyway. Now moving on to the best maps to choose him on in Galactic Assault, the 3 maps that I personally think he's the best on are Geonosis, Hoth and Starkiller Base. Those are just the 3 that I've seemed to do the best with him on over the last 3 years. Geonosis is great for the long lines of sight where his DL44 is so dominant. Hoth is a really good mix of sort of long range in that first phase and then close quarters sort of bottleneck sections in the last few phases that are great for his Detonite, and then Starkiller Base is pretty much the same as well. His Shoulder Charge and Detonite on that map are absolutely dominant. Now moving on to some general tips for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, and like I mentioned at the start of the video, Han is definitely one of the best blaster heroes in the game, and he does shine in these modes once you do get the hang of his playstyle. Han is probably one of the few blaster heroes that can genuinely play a Slayer role in the same way that the Saber users can. Most blaster heroes are a little bit on the weaker side and are much more reliant on their teammates and trying to obviously play the objective, but Han genuinely can go off on his own and be pretty dominant if you do get yourself in the right position, and also make sure to have some fallback options if you do get overrun. Now don't take that advice and just try and head off and try and 1v20 the entire team. That will obviously not end very well at all, but you can definitely play slightly more aggressive with Han than pretty much any other blaster hero, with maybe Boba or Iden being the exceptions. It's super important to know the right places on each map in order to do well though, so it will still take you guys a lot of hours worth of practice, and it's not really something that I can necessarily tell you in a video because everyone's playstyle is slightly different, and there are obviously so many different spots on all 13 or so maps that I can't really just give advice on that specifically. So it really does just come down to playing yourself and even watching other gameplay from other people in the community and seeing what they do well and what they do poorly. I think the best thing about Han is that his blaster is really good at pretty much any range you can fight at. It can literally be used as a sniper on maps like Hoth or Geonosis like I mentioned, but if you're accurate enough up close it can also deal over 100 damage per shot up close and can still dominate against any close range weapons that the enemy might be using, so he doesn't necessarily have a weak spot to his game when it comes to ranges of engagement. That being said, I would say that most people, myself included, are probably not going to hit every shot in close quarters when you're scrambling to survive and there are 3 or 4 enemies pushing you, so I would still say that close range is definitely his weakest area, but if you do play your cards right between all 3 of his abilities and a few shots from the DL44, you can still do very well in those areas. So close quarters isn't a distance that you should sort of be trying to engage if you can avoid it. However, you shouldn't feel completely useless at that range either. I'd say that mid-range is definitely his strongest distance, and whenever possible you should try and get yourself into those sort of engagements. His blaster deals enough damage and is accurate enough that you'll pretty much outgun anyone that you come across, but then you're also close enough that if the enemy pushes you, your Detonite charge can come into play and really help you out when there are multiple enemies nearby. So whenever you can, try to get to those sort of mid-range areas of the map, and that's generally where you'll do the best. I will also say that even though he's definitely not reliant on his abilities, they absolutely do make him a whole lot better if you are using them constantly and using them to your advantage. So don't consider them absolutely necessary to your success, but if you do use them well enough, then they will definitely help you out a hell of a lot. To summarize, your biggest strength with Han is probably those mid-range engagements rather than trying to fight from close quarters or from too far away, and then that combined with the constant use of his abilities whenever you need them, it will give you your best chance of success in these modes. So now moving on to the hero vs villain game modes, and although his playstyle is very similar in these modes, I do think he shines much more in the hero modes than he does in the trooper modes, so in my opinion he's probably one of the overall better characters in the game in HvV and Hero Showdown. Starting off with his star cards, and the first card that I would recommend is the Airburst card that I mentioned earlier. That 20% increase to the damage is obviously very helpful in these modes too, so this one is a no-brainer. The second card I'd recommend in these modes is the Smuggler's Wits card, and this one gives Han an extra dodge ability at the cost of about 2 seconds added to his ability cooldowns. Now the third role honestly makes you borderline untouchable at times against Saber users. By the time time you've used that third roll, there always seems to be another one that's pretty much recharged and ready to go. So this is amazing at avoiding as much damage as possible. The third card I recommend is his Sharpshooter's Calm card, and this one just makes the Sharpshooter ability last for around 25% longer, taking it to around 4 seconds instead of 3. It's definitely not the most amazing card, but I find that extra second to be really helpful when you're trying to deal with an annoying Palpatine or Boba. It can just allow you to deal some really quick damage and often gives you enough added time to actually finish off the kill where you might not have done without the card equipped. Now, usually I mention in this section the characters on the enemy team that I think you need to look out for, but honestly I think Han has absolutely no weaknesses in these modes whatsoever. That obviously doesn't mean that he's unbeatable or anything like that, but I do just personally think he can compete with anyone on the enemy team, even Vader, and so I don't think he necessarily has anyone that he needs to look out for more than the rest, which is pretty rare, especially for light side heroes. Now, finally moving on to just some regular tips for these hero game modes, and really his playstyle is pretty similar to the trooper modes. However, I do think he can be actually a little bit more aggressive in these modes, especially if you equip that card for the added roll ability. Pretty much since the launch of the game, Han has always been a really dominant character in these modes. He just deals so much damage and he can be so accurate that the enemies really do have to pretty much play you perfectly if they want to kill you, or they essentially need to double or triple team you in order to take you out. The other thing that can make Han so dominant is the fact that he has 2 abilities that can break blocks. His Detonite charge will damage through blocks and his shoulder charge is the same, so those tankier characters like Vader kind of lose their edge over you that they have on other characters, as they can't really just sit there blocking and waiting for you to become vulnerable, because if they do, then they'll actually be the ones who become vulnerable to your abilities. Be sure to make the most of the Detonite and the shoulder charge against those Saber heroes, and just any enemies for that matter, as that will put them on the back foot and cause them to possibly panic or just feel uncomfortable where they might have otherwise felt confident. And one thing that I know from all my years of gaming, no matter what the game is that the player who's more confident and comfortable will more often than not win that battle, as panic can cause even the better players to make the wrong move or find themselves in a tough situation, allowing you to step in and take control of the fight. On top of those abilities, be sure to make the most of those 3 rolls if you do use the Smuggler's Wits card. Like I mentioned earlier, you really can just toy with the Saber heroes if you do play it well enough, and they're barely going to be able to touch you, which lets your abilities recharge and also opens them up to attack. So again, play it confidently and try not to get flustered when Saber heroes are getting too close to you. To summarize, Han is one of the few heroes that can actually get an edge on the enemy Saber users with his block breaking abilities, so be sure to make the most of those and put the fight on your terms, and be sure to make the most of the third roll ability and avoid as much damage as you can when the enemy Saber heroes come closer. So that is going to do it for this Han Solo hero guide, guys. We are getting towards the tail end of the series with only a handful of heroes left to cover, so I'm definitely excited to keep on pumping these out. If you enjoyed the video and it did help you out, then be sure to leave a like down below to support the channel, and be sure to subscribe with those notifications on so you don't miss out on any more Star Wars Battlefront 2 content. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day and I'll catch you all in the next one.
Crush them! Make them suffer!